Hello everyone. Now that the Eternals have their full 150s, I want to talk about every stage of that and which ones seem worth it. The 110 starts off pretty tricky, needing 20 Damascus crystals, 80 halos, 50 of the dragon items, and a special crafted item. The special crafted item requires 30 rusted weapons, 200 weapon shards, and a gold brick. For the whole 110 uncap, this might be one of the more time-gated items, but the Damascus crystals are also kind of gated behind events. The 120 uncap might be a little easier by comparison. It's pretty much just a 5-star uncap again, but you need a Blue Sky Spirit too, which is a new item that requires quite a lot of the job points that you never really spend on anything. You can farm a few of those in the side stories, which I imagine most people, like me, have left a lot there. 130 is at the same time one of the easiest steps and also the most time-gated step. All you need is a Lapis merit that you get from Guild Wars, and I'll talk a little more on those at the 150. The 140 uncap is also kind of time-gatey as well, mostly because of the 30 Honglong or Kirin animas. Farming 300 of the Dragon Jewels also proves to be a bit of a grind. And most curiously for this step, we need Aqualusters from Arcarum. It's a bit weird to see the Eternals step into the Evoker space. Lastly, we have the 150 uncap, which is all about high-level raiding. Lucy Tears, Beelzebub Wings, Belial Horns, and lastly, we need another Lapis Merit from Guild Wars. Needing 2 Lapis Merits across all of the Eternals means that it's going to take at least 20 Guild Wars to get everyone up to 150. So because of that, I reckon it's worth looking at them comparing the 130 uncap to the 150 uncap, given that those are the two hard time gates. I should clarify that I'm coming at this from the perspective of someone who does a lot of high-level raiding or solo raiding. I'm looking for characters who have a lot of functionality, and not those who just have the most damage that can burst and race for MVP. For every Eternal, they immediately get an upgrade to their Ogi once you uncap them to 110. We'll start with Uno first. He gets 10% drain on Ogi for the whole team. This is essentially 2,000 healing for the MC, and 3,000 healing for anyone after him. Since Uno is a tanky character, giving him a little bit of healing is pretty nice. It also works pretty well because this is the element that has Justice, which can level everyone's health to the same, so that 1,000 heal actually does something. Then at 110 he gets a 10% damage cap up. Everyone gets this same EMP, so it's not too significant to everyone, but it's also just a nice thing to have. Then at the 120 he caps all incoming fire damage at 10,000 per hit. I don't know if this is for everyone or just for him. Looking at the wiki and stuff like that, it seems to only describe it applying to him, which is weird because Geisenborger caps 10,000 for the whole team, and he can do it from the backline without taking up a mainline slot. So it seems like this should apply to everyone, but I don't know if it does. Even if it does, the 10,000 cap isn't as strong as you might think. This only really stops big hitting Ogis, which you'd use Uno's shield for anyway. Auto attacks and multi-hit Ogis still go through it. Then, curiously, he gets a skill damage cap up at 120. This is kind of weird for Uno because he only has one skill that actually does any damage. It does do a lot of damage, but it's still only one. I feel like if he had anything else in place of this, it would have been a bit better, but skill damage isn't that bad, to be fair. Next up we have the 130, which is the first tier that actually needs a blue lapis. His skill 3 gets Fire Switch, which already has 100% Fire Cut on it. So this is now a skill that can tank Paradise Lost, or just simply be useful in any of the new high-level raids that are neutral element. On top of that, he also gets a new passive which makes him substitute for any character with the lowest HP. I'm always a bit wary of substitute passives given that we have so many new bosses now doing multi-hit Ogis, but at least Uno does have Guts as a passive, as well as another passive that lets him heal when he hits red HP. The 140 uncap is probably one of the most boring. It's only a 5% damage cap up. Damage cap up's nice, but given the amount of farm needed to get to here, and that every other uncap has had at least 2 bonuses, this one's a little lackluster. However, it is essentially free when you look at the time gating of the blue lapis, so oh well. And then lastly, at 150, once you've spent 2 blue lapises, he then gets a passive which lets him counter upon taking damage, which if you combine with the substitute passive, means that he just gets a bunch of free damage at the end of the turn. He also gains a passive which amplifies his auto attacks up to 10%, which is pretty nice. Definitely better than the 5% damage cap, but that is all you get for the 150. Keep in mind that this takes a whole blue lapis, which will deny you from getting another character up to 130. When looking at that, I actually think the 130 is a more significant change for him. Getting that Fire Switch really helps him in high-level raids. I don't think the counter damage that he gets is actually that impactful. It gets you a little more damage, but you're not running Uno for damage anyway, you're running him for his tanking abilities. So for that reason, I think when I'm leveling up Uno, I'll probably just stop him at 130 and start focusing on other characters, and get him to 150 on the second round. So next up is Twain, or Song, or Sorn, or whatever you choose to call her. You'll notice as I go through that I'm pretty inconsistent with the character names. I just kind of go with whatever I think sounds good. When you uncap at a 110, her skill 3 will reset after every Ogi. This is really good, not just because of the damage, but she's getting the buff to paralyze whenever she Ogi, so having that skill 3 ready to go afterwards is a real quality of life change. She then of course gets the 10% damage cap at 110 as well. At 120 she gains a new passive which increases her dodge rate based on the number of enemy debuffs. This isn't that much on its own, but it'll be worth it later when she gets another passive. She gets a new EMP passive which is debuff success rate, which is pretty good for applying all of her debuffs including paralyze. Although most bosses are just immune to paralyze anyway, so oh well. Then we get to the 130, needing the first blue lapis. Her skill 3 inflicts a new permanent debuff which lowers defense by, I'm assuming 10%, I can't quite find a number on this, but that's what most permanent debuffs are. And it also increases the enemy's supplemental damage taken by 10,000, which is about equal to the Hull and Mull summon. This isn't too bad on its own, however Twain doesn't do too many multi-hit skills. This is more something you'd want to pair with someone who does some, like Io, but it's still just a nice thing to have. She also gets a new EMP which boosts her data rate based on the number of foes' debuffs, which includes that new permanent debuff. Then on to the 140, she gets 5% damage cap up again, same as everyone, and again, kinda lackluster. Then to the 150, needing another blue lapis. And this is the point where I think she actually stands out from everyone else at the 150. She gains delay on dodge, which is a skill that a few characters have, and every one of them I find really useful in high level raids, especially soloing high level raids. So far from memory, the characters who have them are Sturm, Summonaru, and Tanya. There's probably more, but I can't quite think of them right now. But every single one of them I find really useful in soloing high level raids. Not to mention Twain's skill 1 gives her dodge, so this passive essentially turns that skill into a delay skill. I actually think this really changes how Twain's used. Suddenly she has a little more high-level functionality. And then of course lastly she gets 10% skill damage cap as her final EMP, which is a bit strange because Uno had that at 120, and I'm pretty sure, having a look at the list, she's the only one who has something so basic here. But besides that, I actually think her 150 is more impactful than her 130, so this is one of the characters where I think going straight for the 150 is kind of worth it. Next up is Sarasa. So when she gets the 110 uncap, her Ogi changes to add Dispel to her Axe form Ogi, and add an extra 99999 plain damage to her Sword Ogi. These aren't too bad, but they're also not too reliable. It can take a few turns to get to the right Ogi, so if you're trying to rely on that Dispel, you're not going to have much luck with it. And again, the 110 gives more damage cap up. I'll just start skipping this in future. At 120 she gets something pretty nice. When under 25% HP she gets guaranteed triple attacks and 30% echo. She's going to be under 25% HP a lot, given that her ground 0 is going to cut her right down there. So this is essentially just a free 6 upgrade to her. She also gets 3000 HP at the 120 EMP, which on its face doesn't look like much, but it's actually not too bad. Having more HP means that she'll do more ground 0 damage when on just a farming team, where you don't have a proper grid to boost her HP. Also, the 3000 HP increases her margin of red HP, which counts as that under 25% area. Given that her drain heal is fixed, having more red HP will allow you to stay in that area a lot longer. Then on to 130 with the blue lapis. Her skill 3's damage cap increases, which is just nice for ground 0ing Arcarum and all other kind of farming things. But also, when she uses it under 25% HP, she gains triple slash. This is really strong and also a really good upgrade for repeated uses of ground 0, because it's really hard to heal Sarasa back to full HP without using potions or anything like that. So her second ground 0 is always going to be weaker. Adding this buff to it actually makes it a lot more lucrative to use. She then also gains a really good EMP skill, which resets her second skill after Ogiing. This is really good because the sword form second skill is a free attack with guaranteed triple attack, so you're just getting yourself back to another Ogi anyway. When I initially made my video of Sarasa's 130 uncap, I went for her just because I liked the character, but I didn't realise at the time that she was actually one of the strongest 130 uncaps for that release period. Most characters have alright stuff, but it's usually one good skill and maybe one sort of EMP. Sarasa has 2 really good ones that actually change her up a bit. Then on to the 140, 5% damage cap, and then the 150 with another blue lapis. When she's under 25% HP, she gains Veil, and also caps all water damage taken at 3333. And again, like Uno, she amplifies her attacks by 10% at the 150 EMP. And again, she's in a sort of similar situation to Uno, where the 130 uncap is really good, the 150 uncap's sort of okay. Capping the damage at 3333 will be good for helping you to survive at low HP, but Sarasa already has that 3-use Undying effect, which honestly keeps her alive pretty well already. Her new passive isn't bad, but it's also kinda hard to justify going for that versus some of the other characters' 130 uncaps. Unfortunately, for being my first 130, I think Sarasa's gonna stay at 140 for a while. Okay, next up we have Quatre. When you uncap him to 110, his Ogi changes to give everyone 10% echo. This is a really good buff. I know a lot of people uncapped him right away when he came out just for it. And it's kind of rare to see these 6-star uncaps actually increase your team's damage versus just the Eternal's damage. This is exactly what Quatre does here. Then at 120, his skill 1 and skill 2 cooldowns cut by 1 turn every time he's hit with damage. If you're in a fight with AoE damage, this is a great way to get these skills back up quickly. Especially given that the second skill gives gravity and the first skill has a whole bunch of debuffs that you want to keep up. And to go along with that, his EMP increases the debuff success rate, which is pretty nice. Unfortunately, there's nothing in here that increases the chance of getting forfeit other than constantly reapplying the first skill, because forfeit is used a bit later. So then we get to the 130, which requires the blue lapis. His third skill now gives 2 random buffs to all allies. These buffs include cap up, charge attack cap up, and skill damage cap up. So there's a lot of really good things amongst them. The data, I'm not sure if it stacks with his Ogi data. If it doesn't, then it's kind of a waste of a spot. And his EMP passive now reduces damage taken from foes with forfeit on them. I can't find the numbers for this yet, but I imagine like most damage reduction passives it's probably around 10%. It's kind of alright anyway, but RNG could screw you with not getting forfeit on your skill 1 for quite a while anyway. Then at the 150, he now does 4 hit damage to all foes when he takes damage. So he kind of turns into a monk, and he even has a skill supplement damage EMP to go along with that. Honestly, the skill supplemental damage is pretty nice given that all of his abilities are multi-hit, and he now has an extra multi-hit passive, so he's going to be doing a lot of damage with that. But, at the same time, once again he's in a situation where his 130 uncap gives him a whole bunch of buffs and reduces damage taken for allies. His 150 uncap just increases the damage that he does. His 150 is not bad, but he's still kind of in that situation where I don't know if it's worth the justification of a whole extra blue merit, so I might be leaving him at 140 as well. Next up is Fifth. Her Ogi changes to add delay to it, which is honestly really good given that you mostly use Fifth in high level situations anyway. Much like Twain, she now just has some delay on that. And what I've learnt from setting up Lucy high level teams and stuff like that is Light really lacks delay, so getting delay on both these Eternals is really nice. And you don't even have to invest much to get it for Fifth. However, her 120 is kind of odd. She reduces turn-based damage for all allies by 20%, looking at burns and poisons and stuff like that, and her EMP passive also increases her debuff resistance. Of all the upgrades to the 6 stars, I think this is one of the worst. It just doesn't really do much. Fifth already can clear turn-based damage anyway, so why bother with it? Her 130 is a little better, but again it still costs a blue merit to get, and this blue merit is denying you one of the other character's upgrades. Her skill 2 now gives Dispel Cancel to everyone. It's kind of nice, but that's also all it really does. When you're fighting a specific boss that dispels, this is nice, but it doesn't really help her in other situations at all. And by this point at 130, all you really have is the delay on Ogi. Her new passive also boosts the allies' resistance to Zombified and Cursed, which are the 2 debuffs that affect healing. I don't know if this is a 100% resistance. If it is, that's pretty nice. If it's not, then it's also kind of lackluster again. It once again falls into the same situation as the 120 passive, where Fifth can just clear those debuffs and they're not a problem anyway. So after a week showing at the 130, we then move on to the 150. She increases her healing specs by 20%. Given that her heal does around 5 to 6,000, this is going to bump it up to over 7,000, which is really nice, given that her new passive now makes her heal when a character is under 25% HP, essentially turning her into a doctor. It's a nice passive that'll make your high level raids safer, but something about it's still just not quite enough. If it was something like Lily's passive where she uses a heal after the enemy Ogis, then it might be a little better. But as it stands, it's kind of alright, just not really worth the 2 merit cost. Next up is 6. So pretty much all of his upgrades relate to his stacks, so let's have a brief recap on what they do. His stacks boost his attack, damage cap, and triple attack. They raise by 1 each turn and lower by 2 upon taking damage. So with that in mind, his Ogi now gives him 2 stacks for free. This isn't too bad if you're starting off in strike time or with an Ogi to begin with. You can get him straight to a good chance of triple attacking right away. However, at the same time, it's also an Ogi buff that doesn't really do too much. If you're already at 6 stacks, it doesn't do anything, and this would apply before the enemy takes his turn, so you could still lose those stacks anyway. At 120, he gains a boost to dodge rate based on the number of stacks he has. The idea behind this is to help him dodge to keep his stacks up so he's not losing them, but let's have a look at his skills again. On Ogi, he gains 2 stacks of mirror image and a dodge, so he's already dodging quite a lot there. If you're at max stacks, he pretty much has 100% triple attack, so you're going to be Ogiing a lot. His second skill then gives him counter on dodge, and his fourth skill gives him 4 turns of dodge anyway. So these dodge stacks are kind of nice, but they're more so just filling in the gaps between the other ones. They're not standing out on their own. It's not necessarily bad, but it's just not as impactful as some of the other passives. He also gains an EMP that increases his counter damage, which is alright, I guess. 6's main job is just to do damage, so I guess there's a little more damage there. Yeah. Then at 130, costing a blue merit, when he's at 6 stacks, his second skill will now give him double strike. This is pretty nice, but you do need to maintain those 6 stacks in order to get it. And to help him get there, he gets a new passive that starts him off with 3 stacks. So it's pretty alright, but it's also a little too much in the stack category, where I'm starting to wonder if he's falling behind the other 6-star Eternals with too much focus on his stacks. You know, while other characters are getting upgrades that change how their skills work or increase their damage, stuff like that, 6 is just getting ways to ensure that he has his stacks, which he could have generated anyway, with good luck or perhaps just good team building. So far, the double strike move is the only move that's been affected, and it's not even usable turn 1. I guess the only thing to say about that is, if he's double striking with triple attack, he's pretty much ogieing every couple of turns, which is keeping his own dodge up, so you might be able to maintain 6 stacks of his stack pretty easily. Then at the 150 he gains a new passive which makes him do 6 hit damage and gain an extra stack every time he dodges. Given that his Ogi gives him guaranteed dodge and his 4th skill gives him guaranteed dodge as well, you're going to be getting this 6 hit quite a lot, and that's also combined with the supplemental damage he gets as well. It's kind of weird seeing 6 get supplemental damage, given that a few years ago he didn't even have a single damaging skill. Even now, he only has one skill that does any damage, but it's a single hit of damage. His only multi-hit comes from his passives. He has a 6 hit dark damage when a foe uses a special attack, and now he has 6 hit dark damage when he dodges a foe. I guess doing supplemental damage based off passive hits is a little more reliable than skills, which have cooldowns, so you might actually see some good damage out of this, I don't know. But once again, I think that the 130 uncap is a little better than the 150. I think 6 was already too strong, so they haven't really changed much about him anyway, but the little that they have changed, just getting to the 140 with the damage cap buff is probably enough for him. Next on to Siete. When he Ogies, he gives all allies a 15% damage cap up buff. That's pretty nice just on itself, given that you mostly run Siete for his charge attack damage cap anyway, so him offering a little more damage cap's really good. But unfortunately, that's kind of where Siete's usefulness stops. His 120 passive increases the damage of the full chain burst and extends the duration of it. There are currently 3 raids in the game that use Battle 2.0, and a few Arcarum bosses, but that's it. Having him go so much in on a mechanic that is only present in such a small portion of the game is a bit weird. Essentially, this means that for the other raids in the game, or the other Guild Wars bosses, content, anything, he's still essentially a 5-star. But there are still some upgrades he has that are alright. His EMP at 120 also increases his Ogi damage cap, which is still nice. His 130 uncap at least does something useful. His skill 2 now has a much higher damage cap, but also increases the full chain bar by 30%. This is honestly the type of upgrade I would have liked to have seen from him at the 120, where it helps the Battle version 2.0 stuff, but still gives him something to use in the rest of the game anyway. The damage cap on his skill 2 is pretty nice as well, given that Wind seems to be pushing toward a skill damage focused meta, so having a little more damage there is pretty nice. His new passive also consumes a Sword Shine stack whenever he takes a debuff, essentially giving him Veil in place of one. Then on to his 150. He now supplements Wind allied charge attack damage by 100,000, and his full chain burst can cancel any omen that can be cancelled. On top of that, he also gains an EMP which gives Ogi supplemental damage of 150,000. So let's break this down into 2 parts. First of all, he supplements allies charge attack damage by 100,000. The Galleon's Jaw weapon supplements allied charge attack damage by 400,000, 4 times the amount of that. And it's not even one of the best dragon weapons, even with that. So looking at this, it's sort of lackluster in comparison, but at the same time, one thing I've learned over the years is any increase to charge attack damage is kind of worth it anyway. When you're focusing on one-pun strategies for farming meat during Guild Wars, or trying to burst a raid in a short amount of time, just that little bit of extra charge attack damage really can make a difference. So while this looks kind of small, I might just be completely wrong and it ends up being a really great upgrade. However, the second part of the passive is definitely lackluster. So you can use the Fated Chain to break any omen in Battle version 2.0 raids. Here's the thing, an omen that requires a Fated Chain is usually one of the hardest ones to break. Most of the other ones are usually a lot easier, requiring, skill damage, damage in general, multi-hits, something like that. Wasting a full chain on something that's easier to break seems like kind of a waste. Then you look at a raid like Beelzebub, where pretty much every omen is broken by a full chain. There are only 3 version 2.0 raids in the game, and this passive does nothing in one of them. However, at the same time, we don't know what version 2.0 raids are going to come out in the future. They could put out a raid that has an impossible omen to break, and suddenly using Siete to break it becomes the meta. So at the moment it might look a little bad, it could change to being good later as it's based on a mechanic that is always changing. However, we kind of go back to what I started saying, where too many of his upgrades are focused on version 2.0, which is not present in most of the game. If you were to run 6-star Siete in a Guild Wars raid, what you'd essentially have is a bunch of damage cap up, his skill 2 doing a little more damage, and Veil on his sword shine. That's it for 2 blue merits. Compared to the other characters, it is a little lackluster, which is weird that they're focusing so much on the Battle version 2.0 stuff. Surely they must be aiming to make him a meta choice in version 2.0 with all this focus on it. And so because of that, I'm a little hesitant to give a proper judgment on this. Whatever I say now might change by the end of the year. However, what I can say now is the skill damage meta is pretty strong in Win, so getting him to 130 is fine, and we'll just have to see if getting him to 150 ends up being worth it. Next up is Okto. He now gives 20% water cut to all allies on Ogi. Having used him in Lucilius high level, I can say this is really good. In that raid you generally use the Xeno sword as a main hand to get the water switch, so this 20% cut on top of the phalanx means you're running around with 90% cut. And Okto Ogis really regularly, so you can keep this up pretty much permanently. I like it as a change, it's pretty nice. At 120 he gains a new passive which increases the chain burst damage cap, as well as some damage to it. Most people overlook chain burst damage cap, myself included, because it's not really that much damage and it doesn't happen all that often. But having this on Okto is kinda nice for doing things like the overchain labour in Lucilius high level, especially if you're trying to break the earth labour at the same time, it's just a little bit more damage to get you there. However, in regular raids and stuff like that, I don't think you'll notice this too much. It's just kind of there. I mean, it's some damage cap, so you can't really snub it that much, but it's not that much. But he gets an EMP that is special Ogi cap. I don't know why he got that over regular Ogi cap like Siete, but I guess he just got a little bit better than Siete. At 130 he gains a little bit more of that special Ogi cap up on his first skill, as well as getting a passive that reduces the cooldown of all his skills by 1 turn after Ogi. Given how often Okto can Ogi, wow that's a tongue twister, but given how often he can and the fact that he now has delay on his third skill, that's a pretty good skill damage cut. Then at 150 Okto goes further into the chain burst stuff by giving debuff resistance and dispel cancel on chain burst. On the face of it that looks pretty good, until you go and look at the numbers, where it lasts for 0.5 turns. It only lasts until the end of the turn. So you have to take a character who can Ogi every second turn if he wants to, and make him hold his Ogi for the boss to do their trigger or Ogi or whatever, so that he can chain burst at that time to give you dispel cancel and debuff resistance. I don't even know if that's a full debuff resistance like a Veil, or if it's just a boosted amount. But you have to make him wait to do that, just to try and block something. It all kind of feels a bit clunky. At most you can say Okto doesn't have to lead the charge attack, anyone can do the chain burst, but you'd still have to hold an Ogi anyway for it. You can't choose who gets to hold their Ogi. It's such a weird passive. I mean, Okto can Ogi a lot, but the other characters on the team can't Ogi as much as him. And you need a chain burst in order to get this, but it only lasts until the end of the turn. It's not even a proper buff. It just seems like such a weird design choice to take a character who can Ogi as freely as he wants and restrict his Ogiing. And I don't know if I've even mentioned it yet, but he gets the same supplemental Ogi damage as Siete, but you're not going to be using that Ogi supplemental damage because you're going to be holding your Ogi to get the chain burst buff. I don't know, it's a weird design choice. So once again, I think Okto's better off just to get to the 130 and then focus on getting everyone else up. That cut to skill cooldown after Ogiing is nice, and I didn't even mention this before, but that ability is going to be shaved off if you're trying to hold off for chain bursting, so that chain burst thing just seems to mess with all of his other passives. I mean, trying to keep the water cut up and everything. Next up is Neo and the start of the last 2 characters added. Neo just simply gets data down on her Ogi. It's not necessarily bad in itself. I mean, anyone who's been in a high level raid where someone hasn't had Mahira or a character who can do data down notices the effect of it, but I mean, I myself often undervalue data down. I'll take something else over it, but it's really useful in reducing damage, so it's fine to have on here, I guess. Then at the 120, Neo gets a really nice passive. She just has passive attack, defense, and data up for all allies. It's just her passive, it can't be dispelled, it doesn't get in the way of anything, it's just free buffs. She also gets an EMP that boosts her debuff success rate, which is good for landing Coma, but it's also good for some of her other debuffs coming up. Then we get to the blue merit cost of the 130, where she gains keen and amplified damage for all allies on her skill 3. This is a pretty nice buff, and it gives her some competition with Siete. While Siete's buffing charge attack damage, she can now buff normal attack damage. Although at the same time, if you run her with Siete, Siete's damage cap Ogi buff doesn't overlap with these, so you get a whole bunch of cap up. Then she also gets a passive which modifies her first skill to apply local mist on the enemy. There is one problem with this though. Apparently the debuff is 4 to 6 turns, the same as her Comatose, but the ability is a 6-turn cooldown. This could mean that you end up with up to 2 turns of no mist, so if you're relying on this, you're going to be let down by it. I kinda wish it was a full 6 turns that would last the whole duration of her skill cooldown. If it is, as it stands, a 4 to 6 turn duration, then it's kind of lacking a little. Then at the 150, Neo continues her thing with passive buffs by giving damage cap and permanent dispel to all allies in the team. At the time of recording, I can't find any information on what that damage cap is, but I'm imagining it's going to be similar to her Keen or maybe even Siete's damage cap where it's around 10%, maybe 15% if you're lucky. Either way, it kind of goes back into what I was saying before, where while Siete focuses on boosting Ogi cap, Neo is now starting to focus on boosting normal attack cap. Which, if you consider that Grand Naru is one of the strongest characters in Win right now, and she focuses on normal attacks quite a lot, you might start seeing Neo appear in teams. On top of that, she also has a final EMP which amplifies her attacks by 10%. It's alright, I don't remember Neo ever being a real hard hitter, but given that her 4th skill gives triple attack and echo to all allies, giving herself a little bit of amplify attack is nice. So once again, Neo sort of falls into that category where the 130 uncap is probably better than the 150. Getting Keen and Amplify is really nice, and I mean, depending on what happens with that mist, that could also be nice just to have a little mist on her. But the 150 is also pretty nice for her. Getting permanent Dispel Cancel is a really nice option, but just permanent damage cap up as well is great. Again, it comes down to what I was saying before, where not many of the 6 stars buff the team, they usually buff themselves. This is a 150 uncap that buffs the team. So Neo's buff is as good as whatever team you have. If you have Grand Naru and, say, some other broken character gets released, suddenly Neo's looking a little bit better at the 150. So I actually think that her 130 and 150 is kind of comparable. Just the extra cost of a whole new blue merit really puts the 150 behind the 130, but they're all pretty good. And then finally we have Esser. At 110 her Ogi resets her first skill, which is alright in itself. It gets a lot better later on, but just at the 110 I guess that's kind of alright. Once you get to 120, she then increases her bounty cap up to 10, which makes resetting that skill 1 a lot more lucrative. On top of that, she also gets a 10% skill damage cap, which again, with the changes that are coming, is really nice. So at the 130, for the cost of her blue merit, her skill 1 becomes a 10-hit skill that now is AoE and inflicts a random stackable permanent debuff. The stackable permanent debuff is really nice, especially considering that her skill 1 is going to be reset every time you Ogi. However, from using it myself, I can say that it does take quite a while to get any of the debuffs out. You're still looking at a skill every 3 or 4 turns, so it takes quite a long fight to really get them all up. But what you do get is kind of nice. Consider that they're, well, 1, permanent, but they're also unique, so they're going to be there no matter what. Even if you only get 10% attack down on an enemy, that's still 10% permanent unique attack down, so it's quite nice. The problem with the skill 1 though is when it changed to 10 hits, it also reduced the damage per hit. So her skill 1 still does a similar amount of damage to what it did at her 5-star. The only difference is now that it's 10 hits, you can add supplemental damage to try and increase the damage cap. And at the 130, she also gains an EMP that makes it so her and her allies no longer consume the Assassin mod when using skills. This is a nice buff and certainly means that in full auto she no longer consumes her Assassin mod while using her skills, but it also feels kind of cheap because a lot of new Assassin characters are getting Assassin buffs that don't consume upon using skills anyway. Hell, even some characters like Naru don't even consume it upon taking a turn. You can just keep pumping out tag teams and getting multiple uses out of it. In that regard, I kind of wish this buff just simply changed what her Assassin was into one of those newer buffs. However, at the same time, giving all allies an Assassin buff that wasn't consumed by taking a turn would probably be too overpowered. Then lastly at her 150, when she's at 10 bounty stacks, she gains 100,000 amplified damage, along with an EMP that gives her 50,000 skill supplemental damage. Given that among her skill 1 and skill 3 she does 20 hits, adding any kind of supplemental damage is really nice. However, at the same time, her other passive giving her 100,000 amplified damage at 10 bounty is kind of eh. Even with the skill 1 resetting on Ogi, it's still going to take around turn 8 or so in order to get 10 stacks, so you're looking at a passive that's not really going to do much for most of the fight. I mean, one thing I found from doing the Nightmare 95 tournament is most of the bosses are dying around turn 8 or so. I'm finding my Eternals aren't even getting their 4th skill off So that means for something like that, this passive isn't even going to come into play. You'd have to wait until the Nightmare 100 or 150 in order to use it. And even then, it's not really that much. The 100,000 damage is nice, but it's not really a massive game changer. Imagine instead if this was like Six's ability where he gains double strike when he's at 6 stacks. Imagine getting double strike on a move if she had 10 stacks of bounty. That might actually be better. But so once again, I'm in the same position as a lot of the other characters where the cost of a second merit isn't really worth it for those buffs. I think once again, you're better off getting Esser to 130 and then focusing on the other characters. The stackable permanent debuffs on her skill 1 is really nice. Not using up the assassin on skills is really nice. And that's the conclusion I think I've come to for most of the Eternals. I'm going to get the 150 for every one, but I think the way I'm going to do it is aim for the 130 first on every single character. I'm going to get everyone up to 120, and then every Guild Wars I'm just going to upgrade 1 to 130, push to 140, and then get the others up to 130 before going for 150. The 130 feels like it makes most of the impact. Most of the 150 upgrades only modify them a little bit, and most of them just increase their damage. It only seems to be Neo or Twain who really have 150s that I want to go for immediately. At least one positive to this is you can just focus on which Guild Wars is coming up for which character you want to upgrade. You know, for the next 5 Guild Wars, get a blue merit, and then give it to either Neo or Siete for the next Guild Wars coming up, and then get a blue merit from that Guild Wars and give it to, who's next? Dark, give it to 6. Given that it'll take 20 Guild Wars to get everyone to 150, I was kind of hoping the 150 uncap would feel a little more weighted for the amount of time gating behind it. But I guess they can only make the Eternals so strong before they become completely broken, so I guess these changes are kind of nice. But I don't know, that's my assessment and that's my plan going forward. I'm sure there's probably other people who have different ideas on which ones they think are strong or broken or would really be worth going for, so I'll be interested to hear what those are. Anyway, thank you for watching and have fun grinding next Guild Wars.